Madam Vice President, members of the conference, during this last year, the SRC on the 4 occasions it's met has had some interesting and informative conversations with the Secretary of the Conference about a variety of issues. And at our meeting in May, we asked Gareth if he would share some of his reflections from this year with the conference itself. And so I invite Gareth to do just that.
Madam Vice President, Mr. President, I'm very grateful to the SRC for this suggestion. I have to say, if I may, I'm mildly disappointed in Professor Howdell's introduction. I think he has something to learn from the Church Steward who welcomed me to a church in the course of this year. I'd gone to take a church anniversary, and with 8 minutes to go, they said, "We can start now, we're all here." And all 7 were there. And the steward started by saying, "We're so pleased to see Mr. Powell." I thought, well, this is going quite well. And he sort of looked around at them despairingly and said, "Because we've had such terrible difficulty finding a decent preacher this year." Now, actually, I thought that was an act of huge hope on the steward's part, because he hadn't heard me preach at that point. In 1782, I should hate you to think I was a modernist by beginning any earlier, John Wesley wrote to Ellen Gretton, "Proceed with much prayer, and your way will be made plain." I have, I think, in the course of my conversations with the Strategy and Resources Committee, and to some extent the Methodist Council, started from a really rather significant premise. We are the Church of Jesus Christ, and therefore we have immense confidence and endless imagination, because we are resourced by the love of God, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and prompted by the presence of the Holy Spirit. Our only tasks are to worship God and to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you begin from that premise, you have the possibility to shape all that you do in ways that are indeed radical and faithful, honest and true. The question, I suppose, is, are we clear about this? Are we absolutely clear in our own minds that our first and foremost responsibility as the Church of Jesus Christ in worship and in proclamation is to be confident and imaginative? Well, my experience of the connection since taking up this post would be yes and no. Each of us can probably in equal measure give examples of good and positive things, and less good and less positive things. Occasions where there is huge enthusiasm and vigour, and occasions when we're feeling just a little bit tired and have lost the precise focus of our vision. But that is not true of the Methodist Conference, is it? Is it? No. Well, let's see, shall we? It's almost inevitable, isn't it, that such a mixture exists. We are a human and frail body of Christian disciples, and not one of us gets it right all of the time, and I know that only too well. But the one thing that is absolutely crucial, and seems to me to be absolutely self-evident, is that we are not short of anything. Now, we might persuade ourselves that we are, and we might think that because we've believed in a golden age that I'm not sure ever existed, we are short of money and people and all sorts of other resources. Well, there are fewer of us than there used to be. But we are not short of the body of Methodists raised up by God to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. And neither are we short of the financial or physical resources to do that. And we're certainly not short of it when we employ the confidence of God and the imagination that is given to us in the great history of the Christian Church. So the question becomes, how do we channel, how do we enthuse this extraordinary body of resource in order to proclaim the one mission of the Church of Jesus Christ? And the clue is in the one mission of Jesus Christ. The conference has, in the last few years, made very significant statements about an understanding of one mission. Indeed, we even gathered together a whole set of standing orders to indicate how important our mission was, so that in one place we had a body of commitment to a variety of forms of mission and ministry. And we have, under the chairing of Ken Howcroft, a One Mission Forum. But I do want to reflect back to the Church that I'm not entirely sure we are taking that as seriously as we really ought to be. For what we did in creating the concept of one mission was to gather together a whole body of disparate and important elements of the proclamation of the gospel and of our mission. And so we need to be sure and to be clear that we have in place such vision and such structures that give effect to that. We discussed yesterday a notice of motion about the priority of evangelism and church planting. In all its diverse forms, evangelization and evangelism is the thing for which we deploy our resources, isn't it? And so the challenge of the one mission concept needs to find a much greater and a much clearer expression in our connectional structures. And we all know, of course, don't we, that our connectional structures are those people in London. Well, do you know what? At this precise moment, that statement might just be true. Simply because you happen to be in London. If I hear again the reference that the connection wants to do something, I shall despair. My own circuit meeting is as much the connection as the full might and panoply of this conference, and we must never forget that. For taking hold in every aspect of our connectional structure, of our missional responsibility, is crucial. And that inevitably means thinking rather differently about money, which of course we shouldn't mention in polite company, but we're Methodists at the Methodist conference. I thought that would drop eventually. The penny, that is. We touched yesterday, yes, a bit slow over this side, aren't they? Which district is it again? Yes, I'm coming to see you later, aren't I? Yes. We touched yesterday on a very important point about the deployment of ministry. The reality of our current situation is that if a circuit has sufficient funds, it can enter a profile in the stationing matching process. Now, we all know that that will not guarantee that the appointment will be filled, but that should not be the only criteria of seeking and receiving from this conference ordained ministry. The reality is that we might just need to mine the depths of Mr. Wesley's practice a little closer. I'm not entirely sure that the raids he used to launch on the wealthy societies to sustain the poor societies is quite how I'd put it, but it's an uncomfortable truth that lies at the heart of how we managed to exist as a church in the early days of Methodism. It is not that we are in need of more financial resource. Of course, we'd have more of it if it was given to us. It is that it is in the wrong place to sustain the vital and urgent ministry. For the identification of our priorities, whether they're called priority appointments or not, whether they are called priority initiatives or not, and I think we should return to that point quite urgently, we must face the fact that there are significant places in this country where the future of Christian presence, the future of Christian presence, not Methodist presence, is now in very serious peril. And yet, we don't deploy our resources to address that question. Rural communities, through the Presence Report, have taught us a lot about this in many years, and now we need to realise that this is a principle for the whole church. This is a principle which will lead us to pour out resources with no concern for return, because we are supporting and sustaining the activity of God. And in order to do that, it's about making the most of our engagement, making the most of our ecumenical possibilities, and pursuing our proposals with vigour, with confidence, and with imagination. This, of course, needs a degree of attention. Proceed with much prayer, and your way will be made plain. The one thing that I have discovered this year is that there is no shortage of interest and enthusiasm for the people called Methodists to talk about God. But whether we know how to do it is a different matter. And I count myself in that category as well. For each of us needs to rediscover how to articulate the gospel where we are at the precise moment. But I don't think we've resourced ourselves terribly well for the task. And some of you have heard me bleat on about this all year, and I'm going to keep bleating until we do something about it. If you walk into your average Methodist church, you will find countless leaflets, countless posters about countless busy activity, but you rarely find anything that tells you about the salvific love of God revealed in Jesus Christ. It's not rocket science. It won't save the world, but it is one of those small ways in which we begin to have confidence to speak of God. And some resource given to that task, some rediscovery of time to speak of God, seems to me to be absolutely critical as we nurture our worship life, our prayer life, our pattern of service and engagement with the arts, with the economy, with social media, with education, and with the movement of people across this globe. For our level of engagement and our language will vary, but the main theme remains constant. Some of us are old enough to remember the days when various meetings had their agendas prescribed in the standing orders. I'm not altogether advocating a return to that, but there was one really rather crucial baby that got thrown out with the bathwater. It manages to hang on in the advice section of standing orders. Now, having criticised this lot over here, they've cottoned on because they're nodding, because they know what I'm about to say, not because they've heard me give this speech at their synod. It is the question, it is the conversation about the work of God. And if that question does not appear on our agendas, a conversation about the work of God in this place, I'm not sure, with apologies to my learned leaders here, my learned legal leaders, I'm not sure why trustee bodies bother to meet in Methodism. Of course we discharge our trustee responsibility, but we only do that in light of our conversation about the work of God. It's a good old-fashioned question that needs a new lease of life. Again, lest I should be accused of being a modernist, let me take you back to 1820. The conference was in serious peril. For the first time ever, there had been a decrease in the membership, a decrease of 4,688. Can you imagine if that was the only problem we had? Immediately, Jabez Bunting put a plan in place. He was good at that. The Liverpool Minutes expanded on Wesley's rules for the helper, and those minutes urged the preachers to undertake some drastic measures. They pledged themselves to a renewal of field preaching, to home mission activities, to public prayer meetings, to attention to children, young people, and this is the best bit, backsliders. Pastoral visiting, meetings with the class leaders, encouragement of Sabbath observance, attendance at the Lord's Supper, the preparation of catechesis, the discouragement of the spirit of strife and debate. I think the discouragement of debate was probably Jabez Bunting's own, but that's another story. Now, with the exception of the last point, we really ought to be redefining the Liverpool Minutes. Not for their 200th anniversary in 1820, because we don't have the time, but within the next few months. It's not a bad place to begin looking at those minutes. They remind us of the only thing we have to offer, a cross and a crown. And hopefully, in all of this, we make our prayer. Enlarge, inflame, and fill my heart with boundless charity divine. So shall I all my strength exert and love them with a zeal like thine, and lead them to thy open side, the sheep for whom their shepherd died. Thanks be to God. Amen.